Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our Sunday service at the Unitarian Universal Church. My name is Matthew Marion, and this morning we're starting off with Food for Alice.
Good morning and welcome as we gather again at the Unitarian Church of Mendon and Uxbridge. A time that we are unable to gather physically, but we gather virtually. The opening words for this morning, may we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and be inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. It is our custom as we gather to kindle a flame in our chalice, a flame, long the symbol of the presence of that which makes us whole and holy, a flame, the symbol of wisdom and of knowledge. And we kindle this flame in a chalice, a shared cup. For we come together each week, whether physically or not, seeking to be a community, working towards making of this world a more whole and holy place, seeking to find wisdom, seeking to be our best selves. I invite those of you who know the words to join in our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. It is our custom as we begin our time together, usually, to place time for people to share their joys, their sorrows, the milestones in their lives. Since we are not physically able to light candles of joys and concerns here, we invite you through the chat or through internet to share your joys, your sorrows, and towards the end of the service, we will read those and light candles. Today, I'd like to read you a story of Babe the Blue Ox. Well, now, one winter, it was so cold that the geese flew backward, and all the fish moved south, and even the snow turned blue. Late at night, it got so frigid that all the spoken words froze solid before they could be heard, and people had to wait until sunup to find out what folks were saying the night before. Paul Bunyan went out walking in the woods one day during that cold winter, the winter of the blue snow. He was knee-deep in the snow when he heard this funny sound between a bleat and a snort. Looking down, he saw a teeny tiny baby blue ox just hopping about in the snow and snorting with rage that on account of he was too short to see over the drifts. Paul Bunyan laughed when he saw the spunky little critter and took the little blue mite home with him. He warmed the little ox by the fire, and the little fella fluffed up and dried out. But he remained just as blue as that snow that had stained him in the first place. So Paul named him Babe the Blue Ox. Well, any creature raised in Paul Bunyan's camp tended to grow to massive proportions, and Babe was no exception. Folks that stared at him for 5 minutes could see him growing right before their eyes. He grew so big that 42 axe handles plus a plug of tobacco could fit between his eyes. And it took a murder of crows a whole day to fly from one horn to the other. The laundryman used his horns to hang up all the camp laundry, which were dry lickety-split because of the wind blowing around at that height. Well, Babe grew and grew. He was in a barn overnight and woke up and found that the barn was on his back and he wandered off. Babe worked hard in the camps. He hauled the logs along the roads. He could pull anything that had two ends. And so those winding logging roads, Paul tied one end of the road to a big tree and the other end to Babe, and Babe would pull the road until it was straight. He did that with all the roads around, and by the time he'd finished, there were 20 miles of road left over. And Paul Bunyan rolled them up and used them in another lumbering area. One day when Babe was hauling a load of logs, he looked over the mountain that he was passing and saw in the field below a yeller calf. And he fell in love at first sight. Lickety-split, he pulled off all of his harnesses and walked over the mountain, and was so taken with Bessie the yeller calf that before he would do any more work, Paul Bunyan had to buy the calf from the farmer. And Bessie, the yeller calf, grew to massive yet dainty proportions. They were suitable for the mate of Babe the blue ox. She had long eyelashes that tickled the lumberjacks standing at the other end of the camp each time she blinked. She produced all the dairy products for the lumber camp. Each day, she produced enough butter to grease the griddle, and sometimes there was enough left over to butter the toast. The only problem between Babe and Bessie was the weather. Babe loved the ice and snow, and Bessie loved the warm summer days. One winter, Babe grew so thin and pale that Paul Bunyan had to ask his clerk, Johnny Inkslinger, to make her a pair of green goggles so that she would think it was summer. And after that, Babe grew happy. And thinking the green of the snow was grass, she ate her fill of snow and grew and was happy and fat again. And she produced so much butter that after Paul Bunyan used the leftovers to grease the whitewashed lumber roads in summer, with the roads so slick all year round, hauling logs became easier for Babe the blue ox. And so Babe came to like the summer almost as much as Babe did.
This will be waived by Antonio Carlos Trujillo.
I invite us to pause, to look out of a window and see the beauty of this day, to enjoy all of the weather that we get and hope for rain at a time now that weather is rather dry. I ask us to be careful, to keep our distance, to wear masks, as parts of our country are experiencing high increases in the rate of COVID-19. I invite us to work to keep the levels going down here in Massachusetts. I call on us to keep in touch with friends and family, to be our best selves, to use the times of our isolation to do things to benefit others. Amen. One of the things that I do generally is during the summer, I make a list, a schedule for what is going to happen each Sunday during the year. It has the dates of each Sunday. It has a list of events that happen during that week. It has a place for the title of the sermon and of the person who is going to deliver it. I do this between the second Sunday in September and the second Sunday in June. During the summer, we usually have informal services where someone brings a topic and we all just discuss it. But that's not happening this summer. We're going to have more or less regular services. And so I've decided that I should start making a schedule for the summer. I usually look for all of the religious holidays during the months that I'm doing. But during this summer, I think there are no particular religious holidays that we're going to be celebrating. But I look also for important times of observing things, Father's Day, for instance. And after I've found all of the religious things and the special holidays, I usually go online and find a schedule of events for each month. And so this year, I'm doing that for this season. And as I looked at June, there were some obvious things that we would celebrate. But I looked at an oddball website this year also and looked for the things that are happening, that people are observing. I learned a lot about June. Did you know that June is Adapt a Cat month? Well, it is. It's also Celibacy Awareness Month, and I must admit this world would be much better if more people understood celibacy and we had a smaller population. Problem is, with this observance during June, there are apparently only 4 people who are members of the organization sponsoring it. There are lots of interesting, some humorous things that happen in June. And there's even something special this past week. On Friday, it was Paul Bunyan Day. Paul Bunyan was a hero of American lumberjacks, the people who go into the forest and cut down trees. And he was known for his strength and his speed and his skill. Tradition tells us that he cleared all of the forests from the Northeast to the Pacific Ocean, which doesn't make him a very environmentally popular person. But he was born in Bangor, Maine. And at his birth, he was so large that it took 5 large birds to carry him to his parents. Usually it's just one stork, but for Paul, it was 5. As a child, he was always hungry. His parents needed 10 cows to supply the milk for his meals. And he ate 50 eggs and 10 containers of potatoes every day. And as a boy, he helped his father cut down trees. But he had the strength of many men, and he was extremely fast. It was said that he could turn off the light switch and get into bed before the lights went out. Maine is cold, and one day it started to snow. The snow was blue, and we go to the story of Babe. In those days, there were thick green forests over much of the Northeast, over much of the North in the United States and Canada. And while most times foresters cut down trees with an axe with many strokes, Paul used his axe more like most people use a scythe. He just swung it and cut down a whole row of trees at once. He worked in a lumber camp that was so large that a man had to have a week's supply of food to walk from one side of the camp to the other. And Paul had a number of other foresters that worked with him. And all of them were named Elmer. That's pretty good. It means that if he wanted help, all he had to do was yell, "Elmer!" And all of his men would come to him. There was a cook in the lumber camp who was called Sourdough Sam, and he made everything, except coffee, from sourdough. Paul was a big man, a big hero. He had a pet animal, a dog called Sport. And one of the workers had accidentally cut Sport in half. And when he hurried to put the dog back together, he got things wrong and had the front one way and the back with the other, with the legs going up. But that worked out pretty well because Sport could run on his front legs, and when they got tired, just flip over and run on his back legs. Oh, there were all sorts of things that Paul Bunyan did. Why was he so big? Why are the heroes that we look at often so big? We've got John Henry. John Henry was a worker on a railroad. He was a black man. And when the company wanted to bring in a steam drill to replace all of those who, like John Henry, hand drilled holes in the rock so that dynamite could be put in. But John Henry took a lot of pride in his work, and he hated to see a machine take the work of men like him. And so they decided to hold a test to get an idea of how practical the steam drill was. The test went on all day and part of the next day. John Henry won. He drilled more hole than the steam drill did, and he overdid, and soon after he died. There are so many other stories of heroes that are usually big people. There's Prometheus, the Titan who gave fire to humanity. The Bible has several stories. There's Samson and Delilah. Samson, a great strong man who was feared by all of the enemies in battle. And he fell in love with Delilah, who cut off his hair, reducing his strength. But when it had grown back, he pushed the pillars of a temple and it fell down on the people that had been imprisoning him. And that is my favorite story. It's the story of David and Goliath. Again, Goliath, a huge, powerful man. Everyone was afraid of him. When there was a challenge to prevent a long war, that only two people would fight, one from each side, no one was willing to stand up against Goliath, except David, a young, small shepherd. He didn't have armor on. He wasn't big enough to hold the weight of armor. He didn't have the biggest, the most powerful weapons. He had only a sling. And yet, with that sling, pushing one stone towards Goliath, he killed him and became a hero. The problem I have with all of these stories about big, strong people, whether they're Amazons, whether they're men, whether they're beasts like Yeti and other things, we always seem to think that the biggest is the best. And I will admit that for many years, I thought that bigger was best, bigger was better, especially with Ben and Jerry's Chunky Monkey ice cream. And yet, as I've tried to lose a bit of my bulk, I've discovered that bigger isn't better, A small good taste is better than a large bowl. Why is it that we seem to honor people for their size and their strength rather than for their skill? Why is it that you and I cannot look at John Henry or Paul Bunyan or so many of the great heroes in the world without any chance of joining them, any chance of defeating them? Why is it that we don't find ways to work together and defeat things, defeat enemies by our wisdom, our caring, our individual strengths combined and working together? Let's think about who our heroes should be today. When I think of people that are making the news today, people who have lost battles and are now honored, people who have lost battles, which inspires others to seek to fight those battles for them. Oh, let's remember Paul Bunyan. It's a good story, and I like stories of the North. But let's also remember those who in defeat make a difference. Let's look at those whom we can imagine emulating. Do we have candles? From Morella, a candle of hope for their dog Onyx, who is in dire health. And Hallie, a candle of concern for the new waves of the coronavirus and hope for the world's cooperation on vaccinations and treatments. I think of those in our congregation whom we see less often than we would like. May we keep in touch. If we don't see people on Sundays, let's at least talk to them. Let's at least let them know that we are here with notes and phone calls. Let's make a difference to all of those members of our congregation who are unable to be here today. And from Chris Vieira, a candle of hope for humanity to heal from illness, of racism, and COVID-19. It will not be easy, but I hope we can all work together. Amen. As we gathered, we kindled a flame in our chalice, a flame of truth, of hope, of wisdom. As we extinguish it, may it burn on in our hearts and in our minds. May it call us to be our best selves. May it call us to be there for others. May it call us to be there for all in the world.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I'll be ending today with "So What" by Miles Davis. Thank you so much for joining us for our Sunday service. Please do not hesitate to check on our webpage for the weekly